One of those approaches is to segregate schools or desegregate schools. Sorry, desegregate schools on the basis of socioeconomic class. Richard Kallenberg or Robert Crossnow. I wish I had Kallenberg. If you simply Kallenberg has been at this issue for a long period of time now, or been concerned with this issue for a long period of time. He wrote a book called From All Walks of Life, New Hope for School Integration. From All Walks of Life, New Hope for School Integration, which I can't remember what year that was published. Kallenberg, let me write this down so you'll have. Kallenberg, again, Robert Crossnow, and there are others. There's Robert Crossnow. Again, they drawing on figures from NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress, has argued that if we integrate schools on the basis of socioeconomic class, we'll do two things. One, we will avoid, well, a couple things. We'll avoid the issue or discussion, the public discussion of race, which seems to be, as Kallenberg argues, seems to be a non-starter. It's inflammatory, and there's obstruction before even the words get out of the mouth, so to speak. I see it in class sometimes. If I use Marx, I even use the word Marx in class. It scares people, and it's almost a non-starter. They put up blinds immediately. Kallenberg's arguing that we can get at racial integration via socioeconomic class and avoid the discussion of race altogether. Not that the discussion, I think that's an important discussion to have in American society right now. However, this is Kallenberg's argument, that we can avoid that discussion, which often serves as a non-starter, and therefore nothing gets done. But the issue of equality always sets up in the heart, particularly class equality and in light of inequality, strikes at a fundamental chord that runs through nerve that runs through the American psyche, or psychomotor composition. Insofar as a greater percentage of African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans, some Asian Americans, Laotians, for instance, find themselves at or below the poverty line. Again, while there are plenty of rich, wealthy Americans in that regard, greater African Americans, Latino Americans, so a greater percentage of those populations find themselves at or below the poverty line. And therefore, if we integrate schools on the basis, use socioeconomic classes as the means or the factor by which to integrate schools, then we not only integrate schools on the basis of socioeconomic class, but we also get at the racial integration as well through the back door, so to speak. Various I think to date, I looked this up, 91 school districts across the country have attempted to implement some form of integration of schools on the basis of socioeconomic class. Now 91 and, 15,000 roughly, give or take, school districts across the country. That's a spit in the bucket, as I like to say. That's nothing. But nevertheless, Wake County was San Francisco was probably one of the first to integrate schools on the basis of socioeconomic class. Wake County, North Carolina, which is in the Raleigh area. La Crosse, Wisconsin. Excuse me. There are a host of these school districts that host 91 that attempt to address the matters that Kozol was getting at via integration of schools. Via socioeconomic class. Wake County, for instance, and they're Wake County, no school, they have a couple of guiding rules, so to speak. No school will have a student population that is 40% or more on free and reduced lunch. And no school will have a student population with 25% or more below grade level. And so people on free and reduced lunch will be spread out across the district. So the composition of schools will follow these directions, or 25% of the school composition will not be below grade level. San Francisco, for instance, uses a diversity index. I don't know how a certain percentage of each school's students has to be from a variety of backgrounds. A certain percent has to be on free and reduced lunch, or not to exceed a certain percentage. They factor in students from public housing, and then of course their standardized test scores. I think it's below 30% percentile on the Stanford 9, something like that. All the districts that use socioeconomic class as a admittance factor, or as a signing factor for schools, has some sort of qualification, such as the one I've pointed out. Kallenberg points out that Nape, he writes this, that more advantaged school environment translates into dramatically different achievement levels. On the 2007 National Assessment of Educational Progress, given to fourth graders in math, for example, low-income students attending more affluent schools scored almost 2 years ahead of low-income students in high-poverty schools. Indeed, low-income students given a chance to attend more affluent schools perform more than half a year better, on average, than middle-income students who attend high-poverty schools. This matters because performance in early grades tends to predict performance in later grades, and high school performance predicts the level of educational attainment, which in turn predicts adult earnings. And what Nape has shown again and again is that this has greatly helped students from low income areas improve in terms of academic performance as measured by standardized test scores, but also in terms of their overall academic performance as measured by teacher evaluations, grades, and acclimation to the climate of the school. And there's research that would suggest, and so it's typically not the case. The old saying that if you introduce students from low SES backgrounds into high performance schools in the name of equality and equity, excellence will suffer. Back to the old argument again. That generally is not the case at all. In fact, the scores, if you measure it by standardized test scores, the scores go up not only for newly integrated low SES students, but also for high achievers as well, and for everyone. That tends to be the case. It's argued by some scholars that, look, it's probably there are probably a host of factors that account for that. One of which is that if students from low SES backgrounds are integrated into more middle class schools, certain behaviors, ways of seeing the world, or worldviews, rub off, I guess, by sheer association, by contiguity, or influence children from low SES backgrounds. They have the parents of more middle class parents have the time and resources by which to hold the school accountable. They volunteer time because their socioeconomic situation affords such time. And so there are a variety of factors. I think you probably can Google this. You have access to reasons why this tends to improve the academic performance of children from low SES backgrounds. Although, I forget their name, Sean Reardon, John Young, and I forget the gentleman's last name, Michael Kurlander, I think, I'm not sure, wrote an article titled "Implications of Income-Based School Assignment Policies for Racial School Segregation." Implications of income-based school assignment policies for racial school segregation. And what they they report that while there's an initial improvement of student test scores or academic performance is measured by standardized test scores for students from low income areas integrating more middle class schools. Those scores tend to plateau and then plateau and stay there, and then they start to fall further and further behind their more middle class counterparts. There's some evidence to suggest that is happening, particularly in if you look at charter school, not charter school, but voucher, those voucher areas and the annual reviews of those various voucher areas, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Cleveland, D.C., and to some degree New Orleans, but again, New Orleans is a different beast altogether, which is to suggest that, look, we still have to address this socioeconomic class issue. We know why they're plateauing. We know why they're not improving after a certain period, plateauing and staying there, and that has everything to do with socioeconomic class. How to address socioeconomic class? It's a big issue. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Civic Enterprises, sponsored I think it's Bill and Melinda Gates. Civic Enterprises, Bill and Melinda Gates sponsored a report, a study. I think it was published in 2006, so it's 10 to 12 years now out of date, but it reported findings that we had known for a long period of time, and I doubt these findings have changed very little since 2006. The report, it was a study, and then the report was titled "The Silent Epidemic: Perspectives of High School Dropouts." And in this report, the authors of the report note that a truncated high school dropouts or a truncated education, truncated, what they mean by that is the kind of education that some students get is represented or characteristic of what's in Kozol's text. They're twice as likely to be in poverty compared to the high school graduate. They're 4 times as likely to be in poverty compared to someone with a bachelor's degree. They're twice as likely to have out of wedlock births as someone with a high school diploma. 13 times as likely to have out of wedlock births as someone with a bachelor's degree. And of course, all that means is that people who have out of wedlock births tend to be poor single mothers. And if you look at what women still make, roughly 75% of the male dollar, education experience being equal. So the issue with out of wedlock births is not necessarily anything moral. With having out of wedlock births, it has more to do with economics. That such mothers tend to find themselves in poverty. They're twice as likely to be on Medicaid compared to someone with a high school diploma. 13 times as likely to be on Medicaid compared to someone with a bachelor's degree. They have more health problems, lower life expectancy. Of course, twice as likely to be unemployed compared to. It goes on and on and on. I'm sorry. The authors of the report ask, I think 300 and where do I have this? 300 and some odd, 467 students between the ages of 16 and 25 why they dropped out of school, or how dropouts, why they dropped out of school. Then the answers, of course, you can somewhat anticipate. Missed too many days already. That was 43%. 42% said they spent too much time with people who are not interesting. 38% said that they had too much freedom in life or too much adult responsibility that simply contradicted or ran contrary to the rules and restraints adhered to or governing the institution of schools. 35% said they already had failing grades, but the number one reason why students, now of course all these reasons, their answers are complicated and kind of run together, but the number one reason why students dropped out was that school was boring. How do you fix boring? Well, you can do like the state of Florida did. You can simply require all incoming freshmen to declare a major. And I don't know. I think various schools adhere to this to various degrees. Schools adhere to this policy according, in various degrees. But you simply, the idea is if a student can declare a major, or something that he or she is interested in, then the coursework can be tailored, set within the context of that interest, and therefore there will be an inherent interest or care for the subject matter. And of course, the problem with that. Hell, I'm 52 years old, and I often don't know what I want to do at 52. Never, much less at 14, which, I'm going to do what my friends are doing, not what I'm interested in my friends and being, with the in crowd, so to speak. Not me, man. So that's one limitation there, and of course, the nature that. Anyway, that didn't work out so well. One of the traditional approaches, of course, has been vocational education. This stretches all the way back. This has its roots in the 1917 Smith-Hughes Act. Vocational education was advocated to keep at-risk students in schools, to solve or address larger socioeconomic problems as well. Now, how well has vocational education, that is, we need to provide a viable economic, the argument for it is that we need to provide a viable economic skill to those students who don't show the academic skills necessary to go to college or for advanced academic work. We need to provide them with viable economic skills so that they won't be so they can make their way economically in the world and won't be a drag on themselves and on society. How well has vocational education met those goals? Well, of course, it's a mixed bag, so to speak, mixed results. Even those Marvin Lazarson and G. Norton Grubb, Marvin Lazarson and Norton Grubb, Grubb, and Lazarson, Lazerman. No, Lazarson. Not Lazerman. Lazarson, Lazerson. Marvin Lazarson wrote a book titled "American Education in Vocationalism: A Documentary History, 1870 to 1970." Now, something to keep in mind about Marvin Lazarson and Norton Grubb is that these two scholars came out of blue-collar work. They I think one worked in a steel mill, came up in steel, and the other one I can't remember. But these are two individuals who argue for vocational education. However, they, and they're echoing, and other people have confirmed their findings, is that vocational education, as practiced in the United States, often is a training and not a full education. That is to say, they argue that as practiced in the United States, vocational education is more of a how-to, which is important, as opposed to how to and what for, so to speak. That is, why. That is, it's often decontextualized. Every work, all skills take place within a larger socioeconomic, political context, racial, cultural context. It's important in vocational education, they argue, to be fully education, not only to learn how to do something, but also understand the doing of that work in its context, in a broader, in understanding of the work in a context, a broadening understanding of that work in context. I don't know if that makes their complaint that they register is characteristic or similar to the one that John Dewey made in 1917 when the U.S. Congress was debating Smith-Hughes. Some legislators, proponents, and then legislators wanted to create two different types of school: vocational training schools and then a high school for the more academically inclined. John Dewey argued that if you do that, you're going to simply exacerbate, magnify classes and class conflict, and that people who are learning how to do something that is a trade, industrial, mechanical, whatever, they too are citizens, and that they need to understand history. They need to understand the fine arts. They need to understand, physical arts, the kinetic arts. They need to understand politics and their trade as it is situated within those larger political, social, economic forces, and how those forces come to influence what it is, the context within which they operate. That's a full education. That's a liberal education. And Marvin Lazarus and Norton Grubb make the same argument that while they will argue, they argue for and support a vocational education as long as it's education, but they argue as practiced in the United States that it leads to a mere training. Others others have pointed out, again, reinforcing some of the ideas of Lazarus and Grubb. Fred Pincus, for instance, Alan Weisberg, Art Worth, for instance, have argued that vocational education has two problems. One of the more obvious problems is that there's lag, institutional lag, so to speak, that education, vocational training simply can't keep up with the changes in the economy. Entire job categories will simply come and go before people can become trained for them. They also point out that, look, there is also increasing. They're kind of operating off of James O'Toole's study called "Work in America." James O'Toole, who comes out of Manpower, the temp service Manpower. He headed Manpower at one point, but it was commissioned to do a study of work in America as a blanket here, as a analysis for the war on poverty, so to speak, what we can do to improve work and so on. What O'Toole found in Work in America was that there's deep alienation on the job. Human labor is being displaced by automation. There's an ineffective link between. We found a couple things. Not only that, there's an ineffective. So there's deep alienation. There's an ineffective link between occupational education and future employment. More than half of high school vocational graduates took jobs unrelated to their training. The relationship of the job to field of training appears to have no significance in influencing the level of employment, wages, and earnings following graduation. No evidence could be found to show that vocational courses offered their graduates more help in employment or in wage rates than did general academic programs. And in fact, most in surveys, most employers would say they would rather have individuals who have graduated from a general general education program than specifically trained to do one specific job, because it in an increasingly service sector economy, they need someone who can, they argue they need some people who can communicate with the public and think on their feet, so to speak, and are versatile enough to think through over a variety of contexts. Though, in terms of vocational education, I still would argue that they're jobs that simply can't be outsourced, so to speak. I mean, unless you're out, there's no way. Not that I can see it. You're outsourcing plumbing. Some of the trades, I would imagine you're just simply not going to be able to outsource that to the lowest bidder. And so those aren't going anywhere. And I would imagine, in terms of providing viable economic skill to people, I'm sure the trades are still important. There is the second tradition. That's the vocational approach. That is the critical democratic. We can call it that, the critical democratic approach. I think it's idiotic. There is the development of democrat or experiential learning approach to this matter, and I'm sure this is. Look, this operates. This tradition comes out of a critical theorist, Marxist, pragmatist tradition, and I'm just failing to find my notes here, but I'll just talk through this matter. Tradition that maintains that any education that does not work. Let me put it in a positive way. Education should be a mirror by which individuals see themselves in context. That is, the material of school should operate or should be used as a way to reflect back to the student what he or she is in context. It should help find the individual to find meaning in his or her life. And that it should always be it should be experiential based. We can develop some of the critical theorists, Joe Kinchlow, for instance, Shirley Steinberg, have long since argued, as well as a host of others, that look, we can cultivate basic skill by engaging students in an analysis of their lives, of their experience, and that can mature into understanding of the social, political, and economic aspects of those lives. There are a couple of examples I will point you to that will follow this video, or these two videos. But let me give you a couple of examples, personal examples, and then I'll move on to Emily Pillington. Oh, here we go. I'm so sorry. Right here, Emily Pillington, Teaching Design for Change. She has a TED Talk plus a website and a movie that may be of interest, and then Brave New Voices. I'll come back to those in a minute. But the idea that you use the formal stuff of education to help students make sense of their own lives. I have a couple of anecdotal. I taught experiences. I taught. I don't know if I told you in this class, but I taught high school English, 10th and 11th grade English on the Navajo reservation in the school year 1990-1991. It was a boarding school in Many Farms, Arizona, which was located about 60 miles southwest of the Four Corners Plaque. If you've ever been out there, it's beautiful country, beautiful. It's high plateau. It's on the Colorado Plateau. Beautiful country, but you're isolated. On my contract, geographic location, it was penciled in isolated, we went 110 miles one way to go to a store. Now there was a little Fina Mart, a gas station right on the edge of the compound, but and Chinle was not far, so there was a grocery store not 13 miles away. But to go to Gallup, New Mexico, I think it was 110 miles, and we would often go do that just for something to do. Turn right around, go through the drive-through at some drive-through, and turn right around and come back. Bonehead kids, 24, 25 years old. Nevertheless, the when I first started August, I had about maybe 35 students over 5 periods. 35 students, and we were allowed to do whatever we wanted for the first month or so of school because there were no students here. School really started at the end of the rodeo season, and of course, the rodeo season, I don't know when it starts. The spring, it start of summer, middle summer, sometime, and it runs through basically the fall, roughly around the end of October. Rodeo season. In rodeo season, not only there are a bunch of pageants and rodeos and fairs, gatherings of traditional, native people, dances and so forth. At the end of that, students come back to school, and they came back to school in force. I went from maybe 35, 37 students to now a little over 100 students, and we were gathered and so school started then, and at the time, students were we were on a special look. I worked for the school was controlled by the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we were given. The school got special funding from the federal government that basically amounted to Title I, kind of like a Title I school. And it was important to the administrators to maintain that Title I standing. It was important for them to show some improvement, but not enough improvement, to take them off out of that label, out of that category. And so we were given basically a script. We were called into the auditorium. We met at the auditorium every day. We were given our lesson plans, told what to do. Monitors were sent around. Either the principal or more likely the vice principal and guidance counselors were sent around to each classroom every time, every period. It didn't happen every period, but 3 out of 5. To make sure there was objective, bell work, objective or goal, examples, and what the students were to do. And I was, 10th, 11th grade English students wrote and read on about a 4th grade level. They were, of course, they didn't even do it. Imagine that you were given seat work to do. You're skeptical, and your parents are skeptical of this form of education anyway. They phased out. I mean, they were lucky if they did anything. I made a little bargain with them. You attend, and so my charge was to teach grammar, mechanics, and so on. But of course, and then basically set them to work on 10, 20 problems, so to speak, or sentences, and then walk around and monitor the work. And of course, they didn't want to do it. I made a little bargain with them. I knew that particularly the boys, they liked to hacky sack. So I told them, if you finish this work, we'll pull the desk out away from the middle, and we'll hacky sack. I really learned to hacky sack during this year there. They were wonderful hacky sacks. And they did. But that they learned grammar mechanics, that would be stretching the truth. However, one of the things I did notice was that a couple of the students, and this happened over time, but I come to find out why. Some of the students would come to class, to homeroom, or first period, and they would sit in the back, and they would put their heads down, and they would not wake up for 4, 5 hours. And I just simply let them sleep. I mean, look, they're teenagers, and teenagers need sleep. I knew I sure did, and I'm barely out of my teenage years at the time. Uh, uh, they meant no harm. I just simply let them sleep. And if they needed a pass, I'd give them a pass. But they lay in the back. But boy, they were out. I mean, their head completely down on the desk, and pools of spit just dripping out of the mouth. I'd shake them. Not hard, but I would try to awaken them. Hey, man, you need to get going. Couldn't wake them up. And eventually, 4 or 5 hours later, roughly, they would raise their heads up, not recognize anyone in the class, or recognize that this is, something's amiss, and then get up and walk out. Well, found out what they were doing, and I found out what they were doing by the hard way, so to speak, there was nothing to do there. It was a boarding school with, I don't know, 400 acres. I don't know what it was. But what they were doing was they would slip out of the back fence, and they would spray cigarettes with aerosol and smoke them. They would spray the aerosols into glasses of water. They called it ocean water, and they would drink it. Again, I've never tried this. I don't advocate trying that kind of stuff. One person said it's kind of similar to a Robitussin. If you've ever overdrank Robitussin, I guess the kids are doing this. I don't know. Drinking Robitussin, it gives you that kind of feeling. It disorients you. I don't know what the hell it does. But what they were doing, so this is what happens. A couple kids were out back smoking or drinking aerosol. I don't know what the hell they were doing. But they get sleepy, and I guess it makes you sleepy. I don't know. So they lay down, and they die of exposure. Cold. It's high plateau. It snows. It freezes. It gets cold. So what they were doing is they're going out in the back 40, they're getting high, doing whatever they do, they get sleepy, they just pass out and go to sleep, and they die of exposure to the elements. Then what happens? The kids are all upset. They're on their way to the funerals for their friends here. If they can get a ride, fine. If they can't get a ride, their thumb goes out. Thumb goes out, somebody picks them up, great. Thumb goes out, and they'll sit there all night with their thumb out, walking toward where they need to go. Nobody picks them up. They eventually get sleepy. Day 2, lay down. Guess what happens? 9 kids in the year that I was there died because of this issue. 9. At some point, and I had some rapport with the students because I was a coach. And they came to trust me. Hewitt, what the hell's going on with y'all? You're crying and you're all upset. They tell me the issue, and they said, what are we to do? I said, well, write your congressman, write your principal, write the tribal chair. And that gave them reason. I mean, opportunistic on my part. I didn't think of it this way, but then I thought, well, it gives them a reason to write. And the kinds of things, and it gave them a reason to write. It was the impetus, using their experience as the ground, the impetus, the fuel for learning grammar mechanics. Now, none of them that I know of, became authors, but they did improve their abilities to read and write English as a result of this issue. I always use the story of my oldest daughter, who was in one of the Orange County public schools, elementary school. It was a 5th grader when we first came to UCF in 2001. She had a physical education teacher who was a graduate of UCF, a wonderful, wonderful educator, brilliant educator, who became very concerned that the girls in her physical education class were selecting themselves out of activities before they would even start. She'd have them run a warm-up lap. They'd just soon not do it and get a 0 for the class participation than do it. Yep. I ruin every piece of clothes my wife's. Anyway. they would soon take zeros as opposed to uh, act- actually participating. And she'd become very concerned with this. She was of the mind, or of the perspective, that development of mind is is development of mind and body go hand in hand. They're mutually reinforcing. And if they select themselves out of physical activity, it has other implications for cognitive development, social development, so on. And so she thought she would fix this problem. She had the girls, I think they were playing flag football at one point. I think it was flag football or softball. I can't remember which at the time, but she selected two girls to be team captains, and stood back amazed at whom the girls picked. Of course, they picked their best friend first, which was usually a girl. But then they picked all boys, and then she stood back and said, "How did this come about? Why did you select all the boys?" And the girl said, "They can throw." Boy said, "We can throw." Girl said, "We're not as good as the boys." Concerned about this matter, "Why is that?" she argued. I mean, she asked him. The boy said, "'Cause we're boys." Implication being, there's an inherent difference. We're much more athletically gifted than girls, as by nature. Some of the girls argued, although they couldn't articulate it in quite this way, that's not true. We could be as good, though they couldn't get it out quite that way. And so the group was of two minds. One, it was inherent difference. Others maintain, mostly girls maintain, that it's a socialized difference. There's a difference in socialization. Again, they didn't articulate it quite this way. So she helped them develop. It took them over a week, but she wanted it to come from them. How are you going to find out which one's right and which one's not so right? Which one's the better explanation? Well, it took them over a week, and for whatever reason at the time, they had PE, physical education, every day. So, and I know something about this. My daughter was in the class, and I went up to help her with this. She helped them devise this. Well, we can somehow measure it. So, she came up with this idea that she had read about. She had the boys and girls throw a baseball, and she reasoned that the baseball was small enough to fit in their little hands. To throw with her dominant arm, non-dominant arm, measure the difference, and then she would 3 weeks worth of form, coaching form how to throw, see if there was a difference. And she asked the kids, had any of them played a organized sport, formally played an organized sport that for which they had to use their hands to control the ball. And most of the boys had. There was the exception of one or two had played either basketball, baseball, or football. Only 3 of the girls in the class, my daughter being one of them, had played an organized sport, but none of them played a sport for which they had to deal with the ball with their hands. My kid, they all played soccer. Then she figured that, well, look, if you've played you formally played an organized sport, one dealing with your hands, you've probably been taught to throw. So the boys get up, and this is where I come in. I helped her measure the distance. The boys, on average, I'm talking average here, threw, I think it was 22 yards. Well, baseball, 22 yards. And one kid that could throw the baseball, 50. There's 2 kids that were, and another one was very close to almost 50 yards, well, over 50 yards. The one kid could. But the average for the boys was 22 yards. With their non-dominant arm, I think it was 17. I'm just kind of remembering these figures. It's been so long ago. The girls could throw on average 15 yards with their dominant hand and 9 yards with their non-dominant hand. Then Then she had a little contest. The top 5 kids who could throw the furthest win a prize. All 5 were boys, every one of them. 3 weeks worth of training form, cultivating form, conditioning form, and so forth. Throwing, they revisit. Well, the boys did improve their distance from 22 to about 27, 29 yards. With their dominant hand, non-dominant hand went to 22. The girls improved their dominant hand distance to 22, non-dominant hand distance to 14 or 15, I remember. What does this suggest to you? So she comes back to them. What does this suggest to you? Well, a lot of the boys make the claim, we're better. We're still boys. We're the boys. Though the vast majority of the class was left with the impression that this is a learned difference. The consequence is really more of a matter of socialization than it is anything inherent, which is an important lesson for both genders to understand. The point here is that she used the material of formal schooling to help somehow inform something important to their lives. It runs through. The formal materials of schooling become the mirror, so to speak, for understanding one's experience, meaning the understanding of one's experience is the one way to put it. You'll see below this video 2 other examples. Emily Pillington and Matt Miller's Teaching Design for Change. Emily Pillington and Matt Miller were 2 architects, or still are, 2 architects from San Francisco, Oakland area. I think Emily's from Oakland, if I remember correctly. And she reports that she was at a conference in D.C., at which point the superintendent of schools from Bertie County, North Carolina, saw her and Matt and asked them to create a school. And you'll see below this video under Emily Pillington, Teaching Design for Change, a TED Talk. That's an introduction. You'll see, I want to say, tell them I built this. That should be the video. It might be just another talk. And then Project H. She basically was charged with setting up a school through. She had the students. They were basically designing a flea market, so to speak. I guess you want to call it a flea market. You'll see in the video, which really requires a range of skill, thought, and so forth. It's so the project then becomes the means by which to cultivate basic or functional, cultural, and critical literacy in students. The other wonderful, make sure you check out those videos, a wonderful example of the critical theorists or experiential based type of education, something that the developmental Democrats have argued for a long period of time as necessary. And then the other example comes from Brave New Voices. Some of you may have heard of Brave New Voices Youth Speak before, which started in the San Francisco. It too started in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1990s as a means to provide cultural or artistic enhancement for at-risk students. I mean, basically provided students with a safe place to be after school. But the creators quickly recognized that, man, these kids have they're witty, they're artistic, they're creative, and this can be used as a means for them to engage in social, political understanding and expression. And among other things that it has now, I mean, it's Brave New Voices You Speak is now includes a range of activities. One of the things that it does is it sponsors a poetry slam every year at the national, local, and the national level. I've been to several of these. It was in Oakland, California, several years ago. In Atlanta, I've been to that one. Orlando, when I was in Oakland, Orlando had sponsored, I think, 3 teams. I forget where they were from now. That one of which I think made it to that, if I recall correctly, made it to that Oakland, the national level. But what I have underneath this video is a link to Brave New Voice's website. But in a Google search, and I didn't have time to, I can't list every one of the videos, but in a Google search under a Google video, if you type in Brave New Voices, you should get a list of videos taped from these national poetry slams for years, from 2017 back to who knows, how far they go back. But look at some of those examples. These students, in order to compete in that poetry slam, have to understand something about their lives in context, and thus education comes out of the attempt to understand one's life in context. It's amazing. It's amazing. And one final, I guess it's anecdotal, then I'll be done with this. I taught Kozol's Savage Inequalities, which was the precursor to this one, to The Shame of the Nation, in a democracy and education course, 5,000 level course for social studies teachers here at the University of Central Florida back in, 2006, 2007. And I had a gentleman in that class who grew up, who was teaching social studies. It was his second year. He was in the alt cert program. That is, he had gotten a degree in something, and he was coming back. He had gotten a job at Oak Ridge High School as a social studies teacher, ESE kids, and was getting certified to teach. And I think it was his second year. It may have been his first year. I'm not quite sure. But he was in my class in the spring. And before he got to my class, and this is a gentleman who grew up in the Oak Ridge area, went to Oak Ridge High School. As far as he could, African American gentleman, he was one of them, so to speak. He identified with his students because he too came from their background. He shared socioeconomic circumstances, was similar in terms of race and so on. And he got the job there with the idea that because he's one of them, he comes from one of them, he'll make a difference as a social studies teacher. Well, by December, he said by September of his second, I think it was in his second year, and before he got to my class in January, he said that this was done. I'm not coming back. I'm quitting this. I'm going to continue on at University of Central Florida just to finish the certification, but I'm not coming back to Oak Ridge again. He had given up, so to speak, and he said by September, October, he was simply issuing worksheets for the kids to do, and he said he said that they struck a tacit bargain. He won't bother them if they don't create work for him, if they don't create problems for him. He said that by and large things went smoothly, and he said by February, he was in my class and we were reading Savage Inequalities. So one student comes up and puts to turn his paper in, comes around behind him, starts reading Savage Inequalities. The kid calls up another student. Look at what Mr. is reading. One of the kids said, "Man, that's us. Where is this? That's Oak Ridge." It wasn't, of course, but it spoke to their lives. He said, after they do their homework, they would come up and he would read to them Savage Inequalities. And he said it was by virtue of it, they had a genuine interest in it, and it clicked on them. Education then should become the materials, should become the mirror, the means by which people start to make sense, step out of theoretical, abstract sense of the immediacy of their lives. All right, keep this in mind. Look at the links below the videos. You all have a good day. The next text, I don't even know what's on the schedule. I'm sorry.